Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. It was one of those days when everything seemed like it was going to be just another ordinary moment. I was walking down the street, minding my own business, lost in my thoughts. The city was bustling with its usual chaos, people rushing by, cars honking, street vendors calling out to passers-by. I had a million things running through my mind, the kind of noise that made the world feel distant, like I was moving through a fog. But then it happened. I was crossing the street when out of nowhere someone bumped into me. Not just a casual brush, but a full-on collision that sent me stumbling backward, my coffee flying from my hand and splashing onto my shirt. I could feel the burn of the liquid, but more than that, I was just startled. I looked up, expecting to see some hurried person who hadn't been paying attention, someone who was probably already cursing under their breath about their bad luck. Instead, I saw her. She stood there looking equally startled. Her wide eyes were filled with genuine concern, and her face flushed a soft shade of pink, almost as if she felt the embarrassment more than I did. I could hear her muttering a quick apology, and as I glanced down at my now-stained shirt, she quickly reached for her bag. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice laced with sincerity, almost too apologetic for something that wasn't even entirely her fault. I should have been paying attention. It was an awkward moment, and I couldn't help but laugh a little. I was trying to shake off the discomfort, but she seemed so anxious. Her hair fell in loose waves around her face, and I remember noticing how the sunlight made her eyes sparkle, the kind of light you'd usually only see in a well-edited photo. She seemed almost embarrassed, her hands fumbling to grab something, anything to make it right. I was about to tell her it wasn't a big deal, that accidents happen, but something about her struck me. She wasn't just apologizing out of reflex like most people do. There was this genuine kindness in her. I had no idea what was going on, but I suddenly didn't want the moment to end. "Really, it's fine," I said, trying to ease her nerves. "I'm just more concerned about my shirt now." She blinked and looked at my shirt, her expression turning to something like panic. "Oh no, I'll pay for the dry cleaning." "Really, I insist." I couldn't help but laugh again. She looked like she meant it, but at the same time, I couldn't imagine her worrying about something as small as a shirt when she seemed so sincere. "Don't worry about it," I said, holding up a hand to stop her. "I'm sure I'll survive." But she wasn't letting it go. "I feel awful. I really do. Let me make it up to you somehow." I paused. There was something about her persistence, the way she seemed almost helpless in her desire to make things right. It was endearing, and oddly enough, it made me feel like I wanted to help her as much as she wanted to help me. "All right," I said, a bit hesitant, "but only if you let me buy you coffee." She blinked, a smile creeping onto her face as if she hadn't expected that response. It wasn't just the fact that I offered. It was the way she looked at me, as if maybe she was trying to understand my intentions. "You'll buy me coffee?" she asked, clearly caught off guard, but the smile on her face slowly turned into something softer. I nodded. "Yeah, we can call it even." Her smile widened, and she gave a quick, almost shy nod. "I think that sounds fair." And just like that, we walked into a little cafe nearby. We found a quiet corner, and somehow the conversation flowed easily from there. I didn't have to make any effort to keep things light or funny. She was easy to talk to, and I felt like I could say anything without worrying about sounding silly or trying too hard. We talked about everything, from the little things, the book she was reading, her favorite songs, to the bigger, more meaningful stuff. I learned that her name was Claire, and she was in town for a few weeks visiting some family. She had this calm, grounded way of speaking that made everything feel peaceful, and when she laughed, it was like the room lit up. She had that kind of laugh, the one that made you want to laugh along, even if you hadn't heard the joke. By the time we finished our coffees, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. I didn't want the chance to get to know her more to slip away. We exchanged numbers, and she promised to send me the details of the book she'd been reading so I could check it out. I knew that was just an excuse, but I didn't mind. I had no intention of letting this be the last time we spoke. It was funny how something as random as a collision could lead to something so... Right, sometimes You don't expect life to throw these curveballs, but when they do, they can end up changing everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that was only the beginning. Every day after that, we found new ways to connect. Over coffee, over late-night texts, and over moments where we could just talk about anything. There was this quiet certainty that grew between us. Like we didn't have to force anything to work. We just did, we clicked, and in a way, it felt like we'd known each other for years, even though we'd only just met. I think we both knew that something special had begun that day, a moment that started with a silly accident but had the power to turn into so much more. Looking back, I can't imagine what life would have been like if I hadn't been bumped into that morning. Maybe I would have never met Claire. Maybe I wouldn't have known what it felt like to find someone who made everything seem brighter, just by being themselves. It's funny how life works, isn't it? One small accident, one unexpected meeting, and suddenly the world feels like a different place. You know, I've never been great at expressing my feelings. Not really. I suppose that's part of why I'm standing here now, trying to find the right words, the right way to tell you everything I've been feeling. It's not something I imagined I'd be doing at this point in my life. Not after all the failures, the heartbreaks, the mistakes I've made. But then again, I guess that's the beauty of life, isn't it? Even when it feels like you've been worn down by everything that's happened, there's always room for something new, something real. I've had relationships before. Not a lot, but enough to know what I want, what I don't want. I felt the sting of disappointment, the bitterness of rejection, and the quiet loneliness that comes after a relationship falls apart. I've loved deeply and lost even deeper. I used to think I knew exactly what I needed in someone. And for a while, I was sure that the mistakes I made were just unlucky twists of fate. But deep down, I think I knew it wasn't just bad luck, it was a lack of clarity, of understanding of what I truly needed. And as I got older, I started questioning myself even more. What was I really looking for? Why had I failed so many times? Why couldn't I get it right? Then everything shifted. It wasn't something dramatic, nothing cinematic like the movies, but there was a change. It started the first time I really saw you. Not just in passing, not just another face in the crowd, but really saw you. There was something different about you. You weren't like anyone I had known before. And it wasn't because you were younger or older, or because of anything external like that. It was something deeper. You have this strength about you, this wisdom that radiates in everything you do, and yet you carry it so gracefully. You have this aura of maturity. It's like you've been through the storms and you've come out stronger for it. And the more I spent time with you, the more I realized just how much I admired that. It wasn't just your experience or your poise. It was the way you saw the world, how you viewed relationships, the way you'd speak with such calmness about things I had struggled with, about love, about loss. You were honest in a way that I wasn't used to, and it intrigued me. You've been through your own heartbreaks, your own trials, but you never let it turn you cold. If anything, it made you kinder, more compassionate. You didn't shy away from vulnerability, and that is something I've always had trouble with, even when I wanted to be open. And here I am standing in front of you, finally acknowledging what I've been feeling for so long, trying to find the courage to admit what has grown inside me like a quiet, steady fire. I've had time to think about it, time to really sit with myself and understand why this feels so different. And it's because of who you are, not just as a woman, but as a person who's lived through so much and yet remains open, remains hopeful, remains beautiful in a way I can't even begin to describe. I guess it's easy for people to think that when you've been through the ringer a few times, when you've had your heart broken a few times, you build walls around yourself. You get cynical. You get afraid to love again because what if it hurts too much? What if you fall for someone who's not right for you? What if you're just setting yourself up for more disappointment? But here's the thing about you, there's no fear in your eyes. I see strength in your vulnerability. And it's that strength, that openness that makes me feel safe. Makes me feel like maybe, just maybe, it's worth taking a chance on something that could turn into something real. I know we're both older now. We've both had our share of failed relationships, and we could easily walk away from this. Tell ourselves it's too risky, that maybe we're just not meant to find love again. But when I look at you, I don't see someone who's been through pain and is just ready to settle. I see someone who knows exactly what they want. Someone who isn't afraid to love deeply. Someone who hasn't given up. And that gives me hope. It makes me believe that maybe, after all this time, love still has a place for us. You see, I don't want to rush things, and I don't want to make promises that I can't keep. But what I do want, what I've wanted since the moment I realized what I was feeling, is the chance to explore this with you, to see where this goes, to get to know the woman who has fascinated me for so long, and to let her see the man I've become, who's finally ready to put his heart on the line again. I want to build something with you, not something rushed or forced, but something real, something rooted in understanding and trust. I want to be there for you, through the good times and the bad, and I want you to know that I will always be honest with you. I've learned the hard way that honesty is the foundation of any meaningful relationship, and I don't want to hide anything from you. You've made me feel things I thought I had buried long ago, and maybe it's because we've both been through our own versions of life's trials. But there's a part of me that feels like this could be the beginning of something I've waited for without even realizing it. Something beautiful. So here I am asking for a chance, not just to see where this goes, but to be the kind of man who deserves to stand beside you, to be the kind of partner who will cherish you, flaws and all. I'm not perfect. I know I never will be, but I promise that my intentions are true and I want to try. More than that, I want to love you. It was on a summer's morning when everything changed for me. I had decided, after months of restlessness, to pack my bags and set off on a journey. No particular destination in mind, just the simple desire to see new places, to breathe in the air of places unknown and to let the world surprise me. I boarded the train with no expectations, just a vague dream of escaping the mundane routine of everyday life. But what I didn't know was that this trip would lead me to meet someone who would alter the very course of my life, someone who would turn ordinary moments into unforgettable memories. Her name was Clara. It was the second day of my journey, and I found myself in a small, charming town nestled in the mountains. The air was crisp, the streets were quiet, and the local cafes had an inviting warmth about them. I wandered aimlessly, letting my instincts guide me, when I stumbled into a small bookstore. It was one of those places where the smell of old paper filled the air, and the shelves were stacked with stories, waiting to be discovered. I was lost in the shelves when I noticed her. She was sitting by the window reading a book, her back slightly arched in that familiar, almost comforting way of someone who's deeply engrossed in a story. There was something about the way the sunlight bathed her in a soft, golden hue that made her seem almost ethereal. She had long, dark hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall, and she wore glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Her profile was beautiful, almost delicate, and I couldn't help but stare. It was a small moment, but the universe had its way of bringing us together. She looked up, catching my gaze. There was no awkwardness, no hesitancy, just an easy smile like we had known each other forever. I don't know why I walked up to her. Maybe it was because of the way she made me feel, as though all the noise in the world had quieted down when I saw her. Or perhaps it was just that I was tired of being alone, of traveling without a companion to share the adventure. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual. Though my heart was beating faster than usual, I couldn't help but notice how engrossed you are in that book. She laughed softly, lowering her glasses to glance at me more closely. "It's one of my favorites."
It's strange, though.
"I've read it 1,000 times, and yet every time I pick it up, I find something new." I smiled, intrigued by her words. "I understand. Some stories do that. They change with you depending on where you are in life." She tilted her head as if considering my words, before gesturing to the chair across from her. "Would you like to join me? I always enjoy discussing books with people who seem to understand them the way I do." There was no hesitation in my answer. I sat down across from her, and soon we were talking not just about books, but about life, about our dreams, and about the strange little ways the world works. Clara told me she was traveling too, but for different reasons. She was searching for something, though she wasn't sure what it was. A sense of purpose, perhaps, or maybe just a moment of peace in a world that never seemed to stop spinning. As the hours passed, I lost track of time. The sun began to set, casting a soft pink and orange glow through the bookstore's windows, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. It felt as though everything in my life had led me to this moment, sitting across from Clara, sharing the simplest but most important conversation I'd ever had. The next few days were filled with adventures. We explored the town together, walked along the cobbled streets, wandered through flower-filled gardens, and sat in cozy cafes where we laughed and talked about everything and nothing. We shared meals, exchanged stories from our pasts, and before I knew it, I was falling for her. Not just because of her beauty, though she was beautiful in ways words couldn't quite capture, but because of the way she made me feel alive. She had a way of making even the most mundane things seem magical. One evening, as we sat by a quiet lake, the sky above painted in hues of purple and gold, Clara turned to me. Her eyes, full of wonder, sparkled like the stars that were just beginning to appear. "I don't know what it is about this place," she said softly, "but it feels like I'm finally starting to understand something. I couldn't before." I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. "Maybe it's not the place," I said quietly. "Maybe it's the person you're with." She smiled at me then, a smile that made my heart race. "Maybe you're right." The next few weeks of our journey together felt like a dream. We traveled across cities, walked through forests, and danced under the stars. Every moment with Clara felt like it was pulled from the pages of a novel, a love story written just for us. But as all journeys do, ours had to come to an end. Clara had places to go, things to see, and I too had my own path to follow. The last day we spent together, we sat on a train platform, neither of us saying much. We both knew what was coming. The train that would take Clara to her next adventure had arrived, and I knew that we couldn't keep holding on to this moment forever. "Will I see you again?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice steady. She took my hand, her touch gentle and warm. "I don't know," she said with a bittersweet smile, "but I know that you've changed something inside me, and I'll carry that with me wherever I go." I squeezed her hand, the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. "I'll never forget you." "You don't have to," she replied, her voice soft, "because no matter where we go, we'll always be part of this story." With that, the train doors closed and she was gone. But Clara was never truly gone. She stayed with me in every new place I visited, in every new person I met, in every fleeting moment of wonder and awe. And whenever I felt lost or uncertain, I would think back to those days we spent together, and I would remember what it felt like to love without hesitation, to love with everything I had. I still don't know if I'll ever see Clara again. Maybe our paths will cross once more, or maybe our story will remain a beautiful chapter in the book of my life. But one thing I do know is that love isn't bound by time or distance. It exists in the moments we share, in the way we make each other feel, and in the way we carry those memories with us wherever we go. And that is the story I carry with me. The story of a love that bloomed on a journey, a love that was never meant to last forever, but will always be with me in the most unexpected places. It all started with a phone call, and honestly, I had no idea that one simple conversation would change everything. I was 22, fresh out of college, still trying to figure out life. One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up, but something told me to. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was soft, almost shy, but there was something warm about it. "Hi, is this Jake?" she asked. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name's Emma. Well, I think we have a mutual friend, Grace. She gave me your number." Now, I'm not usually one for random calls, but there was something about her voice that made me lean in. We ended up talking for hours. At first, it was just about Grace, how we knew her, how we ended up in the same circles. But soon the conversation moved to our lives, our passions and dreams. She talked about her love for painting, how she spent hours lost in colors and canvases. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. Something about her just made me want to open up. We started calling each other every day, at first just casually. But over time, those conversations became the highlight of my day. I realized that I was looking forward to hearing her voice more than anything else. And she felt the same. One night, after we'd talked about everything from our favorite books to what kind of future we imagined, she hesitated before saying, "Jake, do you think this is strange? I mean, we've never even met in person." I smiled into the phone even though she couldn't see me. "Not at all. Sometimes you connect with people in ways you can't explain. This feels real." So we agreed to meet. We picked a cozy cafe in the city, and when I saw her for the first time, it was like the world paused. She looked even more beautiful than I had imagined, but it was the way she smiled, the warmth in her eyes that made me sure this was it. We spent the day talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's presence. The connection we had built over the phone translated seamlessly into real life. I don't know how to explain it, but everything felt right. The months that followed were a blur of happiness. We were inseparable. We went on long walks, shared meals, explored new places together. I found myself falling deeper in love with Emma, not just because of her beautiful heart, but because of how she made me want to be a better man. One evening, while sitting on a bench by the lake, I looked at her and realized I couldn't imagine life without her. I took a deep breath and asked her, "Emma, would you marry me?" She stared at me for a moment, and I could see the shock and happiness on her face. Then, with tears in her eyes, she whispered yes. Our love story had started with a simple phone call, but it had turned into something more beautiful than I ever imagined. We didn't need grand gestures or long time to know we were meant to be. A few years later, we stood hand in hand saying our vows, surrounded by family and friends, ready to spend the rest of our lives together. And all of it started with a phone call. I guess you could say it started with the simplest things that at the time seemed so small. But in hindsight, I realize we're so much more. Her name was Sophie, and she was the girl next door. We lived in the same neighborhood, but it felt like we lived in separate worlds, even though we were always so close. I don't really remember the exact moment I noticed her. It's like she'd always been there, like the trees in the yard or the road we played on as kids. She lived in the house with the garden full of roses, bright, vibrant roses, and she'd always be outside, playing with her dog or watering the plants. I remember watching her sometimes, but not in a weird way, just watching. There was something about the way the sunlight hit her hair or the way she laughed when the dog did something silly. It made everything around her seem a little brighter. We were always on the same street growing up side by side, but we didn't speak much back then. She was a little older, a couple of years ahead of me, so there was always this invisible line. Kids our age don't cross lines like that. She was a mystery to me, someone I knew but didn't know, and for a long time that was fine with me. I had my friends, my bike, my video games, and Sophie had her own world. Then one summer, everything changed. I don't know why it was that summer, but something shifted. I was outside just kicking a ball around in my yard when I heard her voice. Sophie was talking to her brother, and for some reason I didn't turn away. I just stood there, frozen, listening. I don't even know why. Maybe I was trying to find something familiar in the way she spoke. Maybe I just liked hearing her voice. That day she smiled at me when she saw me standing there. And I did something I hadn't done in years. I waved. I didn't expect her to wave back. I didn't even expect her to notice. But she did. She smiled, and then she waved back, the way she always did, with that little playful tilt of her head. From that moment on, we started talking. At first it was casual, small talk, the kind you have with neighbors you don't really know. "Hey, how are you?" Or "Nice weather today, huh?" I remember the first time she asked me what I was doing. It was such a simple question, but it felt like something bigger was unfolding. I told her about my new bicycle, the one I had spent weeks saving up for, and how I was going to ride it down the hill behind our street for the first time. To my surprise, she said, "I want to see that." So I invited her to come along. I thought she was just being polite. I never imagined she'd actually come, but she did. She showed up that afternoon with her sneakers on and her hair in a messy ponytail. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just the kid next door. I was something more. She didn't make fun of me when I almost lost control of the bike going downhill. She laughed, but not in a mean way, and that made me feel good somehow. Like maybe I wasn't as awkward as I thought I was. From there, we started spending more time together. We'd ride our bikes to the park or go on little adventures in the woods behind the houses. She'd always tell me stories, random stories that made me laugh, or sometimes stories that made me think about things I never had before. She'd talk about her dreams, the things she wanted to do when she was older, things like going to the city, studying art, traveling the world. She'd look at the stars sometimes and tell me how she thought they were like little lights, guiding people through dark times. And the thing is, I started to want to be one of those lights for her. One summer evening, as we sat on the old swing in her backyard, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, I realized I didn't just want to be her friend. I wanted something more. It was the way she looked at me sometimes, the way her eyes softened when she laughed. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized how much I was drawn to her. But I was scared. What if she didn't feel the same way? What if everything we had, the friendship, the laughter, the comfort, was just fine as it was? I didn't want to ruin it. I thought about telling her how I felt for weeks, but every time I saw her, the words got stuck in my throat. How could I tell her that the girl next door, the one I had always known but never truly seen, had become the center of my world? Then one evening everything changed. It was late in the summer, and the air was warm and thick with the scent of blooming flowers. We were sitting on her front steps the way we always did, just talking about life. She was quieter than usual, and I could tell something was on her mind. "I'm moving," she said, almost casually, like it wasn't a big deal. My heart sank. "What?" "I'm moving to the city with my mom and dad," she said, her voice so steady, but I could see the sadness behind her eyes. And that's when I realized I couldn't let her go without telling her how I felt. Not like this. Not after all we had been through. I stood up, walked over to where she sat, and I told her everything. I told her about how I had been in love with her for so long, how I had fallen for her in ways I hadn't even understood. I told her that I wanted to be with her, that I didn't want to lose the chance to try, to at least know what it would be like to hold her hand and feel like I was the luckiest guy in the world. She didn't say anything for what felt like forever. Then, she smiled that smile, the one that had always made my heart beat faster, and said, "I was hoping you'd say that." The next few weeks were bittersweet. We spent every moment we could together, making memories before she left. And when the day came for her to go, we said goodbye at the same place where it all began, the swing in her backyard. She promised she'd write, and I promised to visit her no matter what. We kept in touch over the years, letters, calls, and later texts. But that summer, that was the beginning. Sophie and I were more than just the kids who grew up next door. We became something greater, and I think we always will be, because love doesn't always come with fireworks or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's the girl next door, a shared laugh, and a simple question that changes everything. And I guess that's how I ended up with the best story of all, the love story that started with the girl next door. I grew up in a small village, nestled between the rolling hills and the endless green, fields that stretched for miles, a place where time seemed to move slowly, where everyone knew each other's name and life was simple. The scent of fresh earth and blooming wildflowers always hung in the air, and the hum of crickets at dusk was as comforting as the warmth of the sun in the morning. This is where I first saw her. Her name was Ilara, a girl with eyes that sparkled like the evening stars, and hair the color of the deepest night. She had a way of moving through life with a grace that made the flowers bend toward her, and when she smiled, it was as if the whole world smiled back. I remember the first time I saw her clearly. It was the spring of my 16th year. It was one of those afternoons when the sun painted the sky in hues of amber and gold, and the meadow was alive with the songs of birds and the flutter of butterfly wings. I was out there, as I often was, helping my father gather herbs from the edge of the woods. My hands were busy, but my eyes wandered to the distant hills. That's when I saw her, Ilara, standing at the edge of the creek, watching the water flow as if she were waiting for something or perhaps someone. I felt my heart beat faster, as if it were trying to escape my chest. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the sunlight danced in her hair or the way she stood, her hands resting lightly by her side, like she was a part of the earth itself. But something about her called to me, and before I knew it, I was walking toward her, my feet almost moving on their own. "Hello," I said, my voice cracking a little from nerves. She turned, and for a moment our eyes locked. I could have sworn the world held its breath. She smiled softly, and the sound of the creek and the birds seemed to fade into the background. "Hello," she replied, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded, a little surprised she knew. My family had moved to the village not long ago, seeking peace after the noise of the city life we left behind. But in a village this small, everyone knew everyone else's business. "My name is Aaron," I said, suddenly shy. I live just down the hill with my father." "Aaron," she repeated as if tasting the name. "I'm Ilara. It's nice to meet you." That was the beginning of it. From that day on, I found myself walking to the meadow more often, pretending it was to gather herbs or firewood, but really it was just an excuse to be near her. Each day I would find her by the creek, or in the meadow, or in the village square, and I would speak with her, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything, but every word we exchanged felt like a promise that maybe, just maybe, there was something more than just the ordinary life we lived. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, Spring faded into summer and the days grew long and warm. The village festivals came, and I saw her in the lantern-lit glow of the evening, her laughter ringing out like music. And with every passing moment, I fell deeper in love with her. I wasn't sure she knew it then, but my heart, it belonged to her. There was one evening under the bright moonlight that changed everything. It was during the harvest festival, when the village was alive with music and dancing. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and sweet pastries. I found her standing by the old oak tree at the edge of the village, her eyes lost in the moonlit sky. I stood there not knowing what to say. My heart pounded in my chest and my thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Ilara," I called softly. She turned to me, her face glowing in the silver light, her eyes searching mine. "Yes, Aaron?" she asked, her voice like a soft melody.
I've been meaning to say something," I began, taking a step closer.
"I think about you all the time. I think about you when I wake up, and I think about you when I go to sleep. You're in my thoughts even when I'm not with you. I think I love you." There was a long silence, and I feared I had said too much, that I had ruined everything. But then she stepped closer, her eyes not leaving mine. "I think I love you too, Aaron," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music in the distance. I felt it for a while, but I didn't know how to say it. I was afraid. At that moment, everything around us seemed to disappear. The village, the festival, the world. It was just the two of us standing beneath the old oak tree, our hearts beating as one. From that night on, we were inseparable. We spent every moment we could together, walking through the meadows, talking under the stars, and planning a future we could only dream of. Our love grew like the wildflowers around us, beautiful and strong, unaffected by time or the seasons. But even in a love as pure as ours, there were challenges. My father, though kind-hearted, was a man of tradition. He believed in the old ways, the ones that kept us rooted in the past, in the familiar. He wanted me to take over the family farm, to live a life of simplicity and hard work. Ilara, on the other hand, came from a family of wanderers. Her parents were travelers, and they had always talked about leaving the village to see the world. It was a dream that called to her even as she loved me. Our worlds were different. Yet our hearts were bound, together by something stronger than family tradition or the allure of distant lands. But it wasn't easy. We often found ourselves torn between our love and the expectations placed upon us. It seemed that every choice we made would lead us further from one world and closer to another. But in the end, we both knew we had to follow our hearts. And so one quiet evening, under the very same oak tree where we had confessed our love, we made a promise to each other. We would face the future no matter where it took us, together. As I stand here now telling you this story, I am reminded of the strength of our love. It is a love that has withstood the trials of time, the changes in our lives and the challenges we've faced. And though we may no longer walk the same meadow or stand beneath the oak tree, I carry her in my heart every day. Ilara is my love, my life, my forever. And no matter where I go or how far apart we may be, that truth will never change. I remember the first time I saw her like it was yesterday. It was just another regular day in school, but there she was, sitting at the back of the classroom, scribbling something in her notebook. Her brown hair fell just right over her shoulders, and when she glanced up, our eyes met for a second. It wasn't long, just enough for me to feel a flutter in my chest. I wasn't sure what it was, but there was something magnetic about her. I tried not to stare, to act normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every day after that, I'd find myself looking for her, hoping to catch just a glimpse of her smile or hear her laugh. I was pretty sure she had no idea who I was. But every time she passed by, my heart raced like I was about to run a marathon. In the beginning, it was just a crush, nothing more than that. I'd daydream about her, imagine the two of us sitting in the cafeteria, laughing over some silly joke, or maybe walking together after school. But I didn't have the courage to actually talk to her. I mean, she was beautiful, confident, and well-liked by everyone. And then there was me, just some average guy in the corner of the room. I remember one day it all changed. I was standing by my locker trying to shove my books in when she came out of the classroom right in front of me. My heart did that weird racing thing again, and I almost dropped my books. Then out of nowhere, she smiled at me. It wasn't just a quick passing glance either. She actually smiled at me like she knew me. I was so stunned that I could barely manage a nervous "hey." I almost wanted to slap myself for sounding so dumb, but she didn't seem to mind. In fact, she stopped, gave me a real smile, and said, "Hey, you're in my English class, right?" I nodded, suddenly feeling like my face was on fire. "I thought I recognized you," she said, her voice light, almost teasing. "I don't think we've ever really talked before, huh?" I was stunned, like I'd just won a small victory. I mumbled something about how we'd been in the same class for months, but I don't think she noticed how nervous I was. It didn't matter, though, because she kept talking, and somehow we ended up walking together to the next class. That was the first time we really spoke, and from that day forward, it became easier and easier to talk to her. At first, I was still a little shy. I'd catch myself overthinking everything I said, worrying about whether I sounded dumb or if she would get tired of me. But little by little, we started hanging out more, talking between classes, sitting together at lunch, and even texting after school. It was like every moment we spent together made me like her even more, and I could feel something changing between us. We'd talk about everything: school, music, movies, our favorite books, but every conversation was like a little window into who she was. She had this way of laughing, soft but real, that made my heart skip. I loved the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the things she was passionate about, like her love for photography and how she dreamed of traveling the world one day. The more I learned about her, the more I realized how much I admired her, not just her beauty, but her heart. There came a day, though, when I realized my feelings for her were no longer just a simple crush. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were hanging out at a coffee shop. We had spent the last hour talking about everything and nothing, and then she told me something that made my heart ache. "I'm not really sure what I want in life right now," she said, looking down into her coffee cup. "I mean, I have dreams, but I'm not sure how to make them happen, you know? I feel like I'm just floating, not really sure what the next step is." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to say something comforting, but for a second, I just sat there thinking. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew something for sure. I wanted to be there for her. I wanted to be the one to help her figure it out. I don't even remember what I said to her in that moment, but I remember how my heart felt like it was completely open to her. That was when I realized how deep my feelings were. It wasn't just about liking her anymore. It was about caring for her, about wanting to be the one she turned to no matter what. The next time we hung out, I couldn't hold it in any longer. We were walking through the park, and it was just the two of us, the sun setting in the distance. I stopped for a moment, my nerves all tangled up in my chest. I had to tell her. "Listen," I said, looking at her nervously. "I think I've liked you for a long time. Not just as a friend, but more than that. And I know I might sound crazy, but I just had to say it because it's been eating me up inside." She paused, her eyes softening, and for a second, I thought maybe I had ruined everything. But then she smiled. It wasn't one of those polite smiles. It was genuine, warm, like she'd been waiting for me to say it all along. "I think I've liked you too," she said, her voice quiet but steady. And in that moment, everything changed. The quiet park around us faded away, and all I could think about was how amazing it felt to hear her say that. The crush, the nerves, the uncertainty, it all melted away. We were standing there, two people who had been afraid to admit their feelings, finally facing them together. From that day on, everything between us felt different. Our bond grew stronger, and what had started as a quiet crush blossomed into something real, something deep. We were there for each other in ways I hadn't imagined, through laughter, tears, moments of joy, and times of doubt. I wasn't just in love with her anymore. I was in love with us, with the way we fit together, even in our flaws. We were no longer two people who barely spoke in class, but two hearts beating together. And the more I loved her, the more I realized there was no going back. This was it. This was the deep love I never knew was possible. It all began on a rainy day in the college library. I still remember the first time I saw her, sitting by the window with a book in her hand, completely absorbed in it. The gentle light from the cloudy sky outside reflected off the pages of her book, making her look almost ethereal. She didn't notice me watching her. Of course, and to be honest, I didn't expect her to. I wasn't the type who drew attention. I was just an ordinary guy, focused on my studies, mostly keeping to myself. I had friends, sure, but I wasn't the social butterfly. I spent most of my time in the library, reading, studying, and trying to keep up with the demanding coursework. I'd seen her around the library a few times before, but she'd always been with a group of friends or busy with something. There was no reason for her to notice me, I thought. She was beautiful in the kind of way that made you feel like you had no chance. That day, however, something was different. I don't know what it was, but when I saw her that afternoon, a strange feeling stirred inside me. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was the way the soft light played around her, but for the first time I felt a pull toward her. I gathered up my courage, which I didn't have much of, and walked over to her. My heart raced and I could feel my palms start to sweat as I stood beside her. "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here?" I asked, pointing to the empty chair next to her. She looked up, startled, her wide brown eyes meeting mine. Her gaze held something in it, curiosity maybe, before she smiled politely. "Oh, sure," she replied. Her voice was soft and warm. I sat down feeling awkward, unsure of what to say next. But she saved me from the silence. "I've seen you around here a lot," she said, closing her book and putting it down. "You're always reading something." I chuckled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I spend most of my time here. College is stressful, and studying helps me focus." "Same here," she nodded, her smile growing a bit wider. "I'm Emma, by the way." "I'm Luke," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. From that moment, things changed. We started talking more and more every time we met in the library. Our conversations ranged from classes to random interests we shared, like a mutual love for old movies and late-night snacks. But as the days passed, I noticed something I hadn't expected. I looked forward to seeing her. Her smile, the way she'd laugh at my bad jokes, the way she could always make me feel like I mattered. It was all so new and wonderful. It was a slow burn at first. We studied together often, and I started noticing little things about her. How she'd chew on the end of her pencil when she was deep in thought. The way she'd hum under her breath when she was working on something that came easily to her. She was smart, confident, and kind. And the more I got to know her, the more I admired her. One day, as we were studying for an upcoming exam, I found myself stealing glances at her more often than I should have. Her focus was intense, but every time our eyes met, she would give me a small, reassuring smile. I couldn't help but feel like we had some kind of unspoken connection. That was when I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment I was falling for her. It wasn't sudden, but it hit me all at once like a wave crashing over me. I couldn't deny it anymore. I liked her. I liked her in a way that wasn't just about her looks or the way she made me laugh. I liked the way she made me feel, like I could be myself without any pretenses. But now that I knew my feelings, I wasn't sure what to do with them. I spent days contemplating whether I should tell her. But what if it ruined our friendship? What if she didn't feel the same? My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. I had never been good at expressing my emotions, especially not to someone as amazing as Emma. Then, one afternoon, I found myself sitting next to her in the library again, feeling the same nervousness that had crept in when I first spoke to her. She was bent over her notebook, scribbling down notes for a class we both shared. I was lost in my own thoughts when she suddenly looked up, catching me staring at her. "Luke, are you okay?" she asked, her voice concerned. I blinked, realizing how obvious I had been. Yeah, I'm fine," I stammered. "Just thinking." She raised an eyebrow but didn't push me. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her eyes softening. "You know, you've been quiet lately. Is something on your mind?" That was it. I had to say it. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. "Emma," I began, my voice shaky, I think I like you. More than just a friend. I've liked you for a while now, but I didn't know how to tell you." Her expression softened, and I held my breath, waiting for her response. For what felt like forever, she didn't say anything. Then finally she smiled, the kind of smile that made my heart race, and said, "Luke, I've been hoping you'd say that." I felt a wave of relief flood over me, followed by a rush of joy. You like me too?" She nodded. "I do. I just didn't know how to bring it up either." In that moment, everything changed. We didn't need to say much more. It was like the world fell into place. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. From then on, Emma and I grew closer, not just as study partners, but as something more. We went on walks around campus, had late-night talks about life and our dreams, and shared quiet moments that felt like they were just for us. College became more than just about academics. It became about us, about the connection we had, The bond that had formed between two people who started off as strangers and became something so much more. We had our ups and downs, of course. There were moments of doubt, of miscommunication, but every time we faced something difficult, we came out stronger. We supported each other through exams, celebrated our victories, and even helped each other through the toughest days. Looking back now, I realized that our love wasn't built on a grand, dramatic moment. It wasn't one single event that changed everything. It was the quiet, small moments that accumulated over time, like shared glances across the library, the sound of her laugh, the way her hand felt in mine that made it so special. I never thought I'd come back to this place. When I left, it felt like I was escaping memories, escaping my past, escaping all the things that tied me down here. But life has a funny way of circling back around, doesn't it? I was only supposed to be here for a few days. You know, the kind of thing you do when you've been away for a while. Just a quick trip to see family, take care of a few loose ends. But the moment I stepped off that train, the air hit me differently. It was familiar, in a way that felt like I was walking through a dream I hadn't realized I'd been having. The streets hadn't changed much. The old bakery down the road still smelled of fresh bread in the morning, and the old park by the lake still had the same rusted swings I used to push my sister on when we were kids. It was all here, all waiting for me, but I wasn't the same. I wasn't the kid I once was. I checked in at my parents' house, tried to slip back into the routine I had once known. The conversations were familiar, but they felt distant. The people I used to know, the ones I grew up with, they didn't seem to fit into the version of me that had been carved out by years of living away from here. My friends had moved on, and I hadn't really kept in touch. I realized in that moment just how much I had changed. I was about to give up on the trip, planning to head back to my life as it was when I saw her. I hadn't expected it. To be honest, I didn't even recognize her at first. She was sitting on a bench near the old park reading a book. Her long hair, the shade of honeyed brown, caught the light of the afternoon sun, and I could swear that I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes the moment I walked past her. But I couldn't place her. She was just there, like a piece of a puzzle that had been missing. I almost kept walking, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, or maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't expected to see anyone from my past again. I turned around, walked back to her, and that's when it clicked. She was Emma. Emma, my best friend from high school. The one I'd had all the dumb, youthful crushes on. The one I used to tell everything to. We drifted apart when I left for college, like I had with everyone else. She had stayed here, working, building a life while I'd been chasing something that felt bigger. But now she was just here. So calm, so much the same and yet different. She looked up at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. I had no idea what to say. The years had changed us, and yet in this one instant, it was like no time had passed. "You're back," she said, her voice soft, as if she hadn't been sure I'd ever return. "I guess I am," I replied awkwardly. "I thought you were gone for good," she continued, closing her book and placing it on the bench beside her. "You know, everyone thought so." "Yeah," I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. I thought I was too. The conversation stumbled at first, the way old conversations do when too much time has passed. But there was something about being near her again, the way she made everything feel normal, like the world wasn't so complicated. We talked for hours, and it wasn't like the way I had spent hours talking to others before. It wasn't surface-level stuff. We talked about our lives, about how the years had shifted the way we saw the world. She told me about her job, about the little moments she cherished, and I told her about my travels, the things I'd seen, the places I'd been. But somewhere in all of that, there was a silence, one that wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that hung between us as if we were both aware of something unsaid. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was over the course of those hours, or maybe it was the way the light began to fade as we sat together. But by the time the sun set, I realized I didn't just want to be near her like an old friend. I wanted more. I think Emma felt it too. She seemed to look at me differently as the evening wore on, her eyes lingering on mine as if weighing something in her mind. When it was time to leave, we stood up, both of us a little unsure of what came next. "So," I said, unsure how to wrap up the night. "What now?" She smiled, a small, quiet smile. "I guess we do this again tomorrow, if you're still around." The words hung in the air, unspoken but clear. She didn't need to say it outright. We both knew what was happening. Over the next few days, we met up again, first casually, then more deliberately. We'd go for coffee or take long walks by the lake, just talking, laughing, catching up. And with each passing day, I found myself more drawn to her. The spark that I had once felt when I was younger, that sense of possibility came rushing back. But this time it wasn't just a fleeting crush. It was deeper. It felt like a second chance at something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment. But it wasn't easy. I had changed. She had changed. And we had both gone down different paths in the years we'd been apart. There was hesitation, moments of doubt. Was this just nostalgia? Was I chasing something that wasn't really there anymore? I had my doubts, but when I saw her again, when I felt that pull toward her, I knew. One evening, as we stood by the lake, watching the stars start to appear, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to her and said it, the thing I'd been trying to put into words for days. "Emma," I started, "I don't know how this happened, but I feel like I'm falling for you all over again." She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me with those warm, familiar eyes, and for a long moment, I wondered if I had said too much. But then she smiled. "I think I've been waiting for you to say that," she said quietly. And in that moment, everything felt right. All the years I had spent away from here, all the decisions I had made, all the paths I had taken, they had led me back here to this moment, to her. I had come back to my old city thinking I was just checking off a few boxes, but what I found was so much more. Sometimes love doesn't happen the way you expect it to. Sometimes it finds you in the last place you thought to look, in the last person you thought you'd meet again. I had always thought of her as just a friend. You know, someone you can rely on, someone who makes you laugh when you've had a rough day. We'd been through so much together, work trips, late-night coffee runs, and a million inside jokes that only we understood. Her name was Emma, and she was always there, steady, calm, and thoughtful. She was the kind of person who listened when you spoke, really listened, and made you feel like your thoughts mattered. I admired her for that. It was a regular Thursday when our boss told us that we'd both be traveling for a business trip. At first, I didn't think much of it. Another week, another trip. But I had no idea how much this one would change things between us. We were going to a conference in a city neither of us had visited before. The whole thing was business. But I couldn't deny the fact that there was something exciting about being away from the usual routine. It was just the two of us, no other co-workers. And somehow, it felt like the world had just given us a rare opportunity to spend time together, outside of our normal, everyday lives. The flight was the usual, quiet, with a few glances here and there. Emma and I settled into our seats side by side. We talked a little, but I noticed how the hours seemed to stretch out longer than normal. I wasn't sure if it was because we were heading to a new place, or if it was because something had shifted in the way I saw her. I'd always known her as this amazing, down-to-earth woman, but now I saw her in a new light. Maybe it was the way she smiled when she talked about her hopes for the future, or how the sunlight that filtered through the window seemed to catch her hair in a way that made her look like a painting. She wasn't just Emma anymore. She was someone I felt something deeper for. When we arrived at the hotel, we checked in and headed straight to our rooms to freshen up before the opening dinner of the conference. The evening passed by with a lot of networking and handshakes, but as the night wore on, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma. I'd always appreciated her humor and intellect, but now I found myself wanting to spend more time with her. I caught myself glancing at her across the room, wondering if she felt the same. By the time we made our way back to the hotel after the event, it was late. We were both tired, but not ready to call it a night. I suggested a walk around the city to unwind. The streets were quiet, with the soft glow of streetlights illuminating the way. We walked along the river, chatting about anything and everything, work, life, the future. Emma's voice had a way of soothing me, like the calmness of the water beside us. It was in those moments that I realized just how much I enjoyed being around her. We stopped at a small cafe, the kind you find tucked away in the corners of a foreign city, where only locals seem to know about it. We ordered hot chocolate, an odd choice. I know for a business trip, but it felt right at the time. Sitting there across from her, I couldn't help but feel a flutter in my chest. She looked at me, and for a brief second her gaze lingered longer than usual. I wondered if she felt what I was feeling too. She smiled, breaking the silence. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "We've been working together for so long, but this feels like a different side of you." I chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I get that. It's like everything feels a little more real when we're not just in the office. You know?" She nodded, her eyes searching mine as if she was trying to read something in them. There was something in the air between us that felt unspoken, and I wasn't sure how to name it. The evening was so quiet, the only sounds being our voices and the occasional clink of a spoon against a cup. After a while, we walked back to the hotel, the cool night air waking us up. When we reached the entrance, Emma stopped, hesitating for a moment. "Hey, thanks for tonight," she said softly, her eyes warm. "I'm glad we did this." "Me too," I replied, unsure how to express how much more than just a walk it had been for me. I had never felt this way about her before, but there it was, something different. Something that made my heart race a little faster. The next day, we spent the whole day at the conference. It was filled with sessions, meetings, and networking events, but all I could think about was Emma. I found myself waiting for every little moment. We could share a quick glance across the room, a shared coffee during a break, those small, seemingly insignificant interactions that made my day better. It was clear that something had shifted between us. I couldn't tell if she felt it too, but I had to believe she did. That evening, after the conference ended, we went for dinner again. This time, though, the atmosphere felt different, charged in a way. We sat at a small table in the corner of the restaurant, the city lights twinkling outside the window. I didn't know how to start, but the tension was there. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "do you think we're just friends?" She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. "I mean, do you think there's something more between us? Or is it just the trip? Just the change of scenery?" She paused, her lips curving into a small smile. "I've been thinking the same thing." That was all I needed. Her honesty, the fact that she was thinking the same thing, made me feel like maybe this was real. We talked long into the night, about everything and nothing, until the waiter finally asked if we wanted to wrap up. When we left, there was no denying it anymore. We weren't just friends. We were something more, something deeper, something neither of us had expected but both felt. The next few days were a blur. We were still at the conference, but now there was this unspoken bond between us. We shared moments, quiet moments where we would catch each other's eyes and smile, like we were in on a secret that no one else knew. Our conversations became more personal, more intimate. She would tell me things about her past, her dreams, her fears, things I never knew before. And I shared my own too, in a way that felt completely natural, as if I had always been able to open up to her. By the end of the trip, when we were heading back home, I knew that this wasn't just a passing feeling. We had crossed a line that we couldn't uncross. I didn't want to. The love that had quietly blossomed between us wasn't just some fleeting moment on a business trip, it was real. And I knew I wanted to explore it. "I'm glad we went on this trip together," she said as we waited at the airport. "Me too," I said, my heart full of hope. "It's been perfect." She smiled at me, and I just knew that our story was only just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. It all started when I least expected it. I was running late for work like every other day. My boss had just called and said I was on thin ice for missing a meeting the week before, so I was hurrying through the city streets, trying to get my coffee, my breakfast, and myself in order all at once. I had this frantic energy, the kind where everything feels like it's moving too fast, but you're stuck in slow motion. I should have slowed down, but I didn't. That's when it happened. I was crossing the street, completely distracted when out of nowhere, I felt a heavy impact. My shoulder hit something hard, and I stumbled, completely losing my balance. I was so caught off guard that I didn't even realize what had happened at first. But when I looked up, I saw her, a girl. She was standing there, a look of complete shock on her face. She'd been on a bike, weaving in and out of traffic, and when I stepped into her path, she swerved to avoid me. But it was too late. She hit me. I knocked her off balance, and she fell straight onto the pavement, her bike clattering behind her. I rushed over to her. I don't know why, but I was panicked. My heart was racing. Not from the near collision, but from seeing her on the ground, looking disoriented. "Are you okay?" I asked, even though the words felt stupid. I mean, of course, she wasn't okay. She'd just crashed. She blinked at me, probably just as stunned as I was. Her cheeks flushed as she sat up, brushing her hair out of her eyes. She was beautiful in an effortless way. No makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a simple denim jacket and jeans. She looked like someone who could easily blend into a crowd but also stand out if you paid attention. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wasn't very convincing. She winced as she stood up, dusting herself off. "Just a little rattled." "Are you okay?" I nodded, realizing I hadn't even checked myself. "No injuries, just a bruised ego." Yeah, I'm good," I said, offering my hand to help her up. But then, before I could get a grip on the situation, she looked down at her bike. The front wheel was bent and the chain was off. It was a mess. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out, guilt crashing over me. "I didn't mean to." She shook her head quickly. "No, it's okay. It's not your fault. I should have been paying more attention." I felt this strange, uncomfortable tension in the air. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. So I just stood there, staring at her bike like it was the most important thing in the world. She noticed my gaze. "I think it's done for," she said with a small sigh. "Guess I'll have to walk the rest of the way." I felt a surge of guilt. "Let me help. I could take it to a shop or something. I could pay for repairs." She blinked at me again as if surprised by my offer. But then she smiled just a little. "You really don't have to. I'm sure it's not the end of the world. I'll just walk." "Seriously, it's no problem," I insisted. "I don't mind." She hesitated, then looked at me like she was considering something. "Well, if you're sure, I guess I'll take you up on it." She was trying to be polite, but I could see the reluctance. I felt like an idiot, but somehow I couldn't leave her like this. We walked together to the nearest bike shop, me holding her bike and her walking beside me. It was awkward at first, with none of the usual small talk. But after a few blocks, we started to talk more easily. She told me her name was Lucy, that she worked in a small bookstore downtown. She loved books, loved the quiet, but she also had a thing for cycling, said it was a good way to get some air and clear her head. And me. I just blurted out that I worked in advertising and that my boss was a nightmare. I don't know why I was so open, but it felt easy with her. It wasn't until we reached the shop that I realized how much time had passed. The bike repair would take a couple of hours, and that's when I offered her to grab lunch with me while we waited. "I owe you that at least," I said, nervously chuckling. She agreed, but only after a little hesitation. I could tell she wasn't sure if she should, but I think something about the situation made it feel right. We walked to a nearby cafe and the conversation flowed. It wasn't just idle talk anymore. It was real, deeper. She told me about her dreams of writing, about wanting to open her own little library one day. I told her about my frustrations with my job, how I hated the monotony of it. Somehow it all felt so honest. We spent hours talking, laughing. By the time the bike was fixed, I felt like I had known her for years. I didn't want the afternoon to end, but it had to. We parted ways outside the shop, and I watched her ride off on her bike. Her head turned just enough to give me a small, almost shy wave. I stood there for a moment, just watching her disappear into the distance, the warmth of the day settling over me. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that day. I felt like I'd met someone who completely changed the way I saw the world. Someone who didn't just float through life, she felt it deeply. She made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. So I did what anyone would do in my shoes. I texted her, and to my relief, she responded. We started talking more regularly, sending messages throughout the day, meeting for coffee, lunches, bike rides. It was like we were in our own little bubble, one where time didn't matter, and the world outside seemed to fade away. The more I got to know her, the more I realized that maybe that accident wasn't an accident at all. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was supposed to happen. Because looking back now, I can't imagine my life without her. Lucy, she's the one who made me believe that love can be unexpected, that the best moments, the ones that change your life forever, often come from the things that catch you off guard. And I'm grateful for that day, the one that started with an accident, but ended up being the most beautiful thing to ever happen to.